The man who made entire cities tremble froze in his own kitchen, staring at a little girl eating spaghetti off the floor. Her spoon clinked like a confession. And in that tiny sound, the world's most feared man heard something he hadn't felt in years. His own heartbeat. Welcome back, my wonderful family and friends. If you're hooked in and excited to dive into this tale, click subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I'll have another captivating story just like this one, and you won't want to miss it. Now, let's get started. The house was too quiet for a place that hid so much noise. Outside, the night pressed against the windows like an uninvited guest, but inside, the Moretti mansion was a cathedral of control. White cabinets, silent appliances, and the faint metallic hum of power. Vincenzo Moretti loosened his tie as he stepped into the kitchen. Midnight dinners had become a habit, though he rarely touched the food. He didn't eat because hunger was familiar, almost comforting. Hunger kept his mind sharp. Hunger reminded him he wasn't untouchable. He opened the refrigerator, found a plate wrapped in foil, and set it on the counter. Rosa, his maid, had left it there like she always did. She had a talent for anticipating what he needed before he even asked. A quiet, obedient woman. He respected that. He turned, ready to leave, when something small caught his eye near the floor. Movement. He narrowed his gaze. A shadow between the cabinets. Then a sound, soft, rhythmic, almost musical. A fork scraping against porcelain. Vincenzo stepped closer. The overhead light flicked on, revealing a mess on the floor, a plate of spaghetti, sauce splattered in an abstract burst of red and orange. And beside it, a little girl, her knees drawn in, eating with the slow concentration of someone savoring every bite. She froze when the light hit her. For a second, they just stared at each other. The boss and the child, the predator and the uninvited guest. Her eyes were wide, a green-gray mix that reminded him of fog over water. Her hair was tangled, her cheeks smudged with sauce. She looked both guilty and defiant, like a cat caught stealing food from a lion. "Who are you?" Vincenzo's voice came out quiet but dangerous. Too measured for someone asking about a lost child. The girl blinked. "Lila." "Lila what?" She tilted her head. "Just Lila. Mama says our last name doesn't fit in rich people's houses." The corner of his mouth twitched. A response that bold would have gotten a grown man shot, but from her it was almost entertaining. He crouched slightly, his polished shoes inches from the spaghetti. "Your mother works here?" She nodded and scooped another forkful. "Rosa. She's cleaning upstairs. I was in the laundry room but it smelled like socks." Vincenzo said nothing. His silence filled the air like smoke. Lila looked up at him again, unsure whether she should stop eating. "I was hungry," she murmured. "You weren't going to eat it anyway." "How do you know that?" he asked. "Because it's cold. And because you look like someone who eats secrets, not spaghetti." That made him pause. The words hit him harder than he expected, though she said them with no intention to wound. He had to look away, just for a second. In another life, before the suits, before the empire, he'd been a hungry child too. A boy stealing half-rotten bread from behind bakeries. He knew what it meant to eat what wasn't yours because life didn't give you what you needed. When he looked back at her, something unfamiliar flickered behind his eyes. Not pity, not yet compassion, but recognition. "Does your mother know you're here?" "No," she licked a bit of sauce from her wrist. "She said don't come out till she's done, but the room's dark and the light switch makes sparks." "You disobeyed her," he said. "I got hungry," she said again, shrugging. "You ever get hungry?" He studied her. The audacity. The simplicity. He'd built an empire on fear, and here was a child speaking to him like he was just another tired adult. "Finish your food," he said at last, straightening. "Then go back to your mother." Lila hesitated. "You're not mad." "I don't get mad," he replied, deadpan. "I delegate it." She frowned, clearly trying to decode the joke. "That means you let someone else do it?" "Something like that." Her eyes narrowed as she considered him, as though deciding if he was dangerous or just weird. "That's lazy." It was the first time in years someone had called him lazy to his face and lived through it. Against his will, he almost laughed. Instead, he turned away and leaned against the counter, pretending to check his phone. But he didn't read the messages. He was listening to the soft sound of her fork, the occasional slurp, and the silence between them that no longer felt empty. He'd forgotten what an ordinary night could sound like. When Rosa finally found them 10 minutes later, she nearly dropped her cleaning cloth. Madonna mia, Signore Moretti. I'm so sorry. She rushed forward, grabbing Lila's arm. Lila, I told you to stay. She was hungry, Vincenzo interrupted, not looking up. Rosa froze. Yes, sir. I'll take her home immediately. She won't. He raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. Make sure she's fed before she hides next time. Rosa blinked, unsure if that was sarcasm or an order. Of course, sir. Lila, standing behind her mother's legs, gave him a small wave. Sauce on her chin, noodles in her hair, fearless grin. He didn't wave back. But when they left, he found himself staring at the plate she'd emptied and thought, for the first time in years, that maybe his kitchen wasn't as quiet as it used to be. Morning came grudgingly over the Moretti estate, draping sunlight across manicured lawns and iron fences that hid far less beautiful things. Vincenzo didn't sleep much. He never did. He'd spent the night in his study, half reading a report from one of his lieutenants and half thinking about a 7-year-old girl who ate his leftovers as if they were treasure. He poured himself coffee, black and bitter, and stared out the tall windows. Somewhere near the staff quarters, Rosa was likely scolding her daughter, and he could almost hear it, the rhythm of a mother's fear disguised as anger. He told himself it wasn't his concern. Yet his thoughts lingered like smoke. The intercom buzzed. Boss. Came a voice. The Tremonti deal's ready for signing. Tell them to wait, Vincenzo said. 15 minutes. 15. The man sounded nervous. They're expecting. I said 15. He hung up before hearing the reply. He wasn't sure why. Perhaps because of the Tremonti deal, the new shipment, and the politics of it all, it suddenly felt trivial compared to a child's bold honesty. He smirked to himself, annoyed at his own distraction. I'm losing my edge, he thought. Over a kid with sauce on her face. Rosa appeared in the doorway a little later. Hat in hand, shoulders tight. She didn't make eye contact as she spoke. Signore Moretti, I came to apologize again for last night. Lila was hungry, he finished, setting his coffee down. I recall. Yes, sir. She won't bother you again. Did you feed her this morning? Rosa blinked. Excuse me. It's a question, not an accusation. Did you feed her? Yes, of course. Good. He looked at her, tone unreadable. Children who go hungry start asking dangerous questions. I used to be one. That silenced her. He waved a hand toward the kitchen counter. Take some fruit with you. For her. Sir, that's too kind, I couldn't. He gave her a look that turned her refusal into immediate compliance. She gathered 2 apples and a banana, murmuring thanks as she left. As the door shut, Vincenzo muttered under his breath. Too kind. That's new. He sipped his coffee and scowled. It suddenly tasted weak. Later that afternoon, he was reviewing shipment records in his office when a soft knock interrupted him. No one knocked softly on his house. People usually entered with confidence. Or fear. Come in, he said. The door cracked open. A small head peeked in. Hi, said Lila. Mama's in the laundry again. I was bored. He leaned back in his chair, brows rising. You're persistent. She stepped inside, holding something behind her back. I brought you something. Vincenzo eyed her warily. If it's another plate of pasta. It's a drawing, she said quickly, revealing a crumpled paper. Crayon lines sprawled across it, red scribbles, a big blue rectangle that might have been a car, and 2 stick figures. One tall, one small. That's you, she explained, pointing to the tall one. You look grumpy, so I smiled at you. You needed one. And the small one? Me, she said proudly. I'm teaching you how to eat. He stared at it longer than he should have. The absurd simplicity of it made him laugh, a short, quiet sound that startled even him. "Why would I need to be taught how to eat?" "Because you don't," she said matter-of-factly. "Mama says powerful men forget. Your mother says too much. She says the truth." He folded the paper carefully, more gently than any of his men would believe possible. "What do you want, Lila?" She tilted her head, unbothered by his tone. "You look lonely." That caught him off guard. "I look busy." "No, you look lonely," she repeated, unflinching. "Busy and lonely are different. Busy is when you have too much to do. Lonely is when you have too much not to do." He blinked, unsure whether to laugh or feel exposed. "How old are you again?" 7. 7 going on 70, he muttered. She smiled. "Mama says I get that from her. You should smile more too." "Why's that?" "Because your face is scary." He chuckled under his breath. "That's the point." She walked closer, ignoring the warning in his tone, and set her hand on the edge of his desk. "You don't scare me." He looked at her tiny hand, sticky fingerprints against polished wood, and for some strange reason he didn't move it away. "Be careful, Lila," he said quietly. "People who aren't scared of me usually end up learning why they should be." Her eyes softened. "Then maybe you just need better people." That line hit him like a slap made of silk. Before he could reply, Rosa's frantic voice echoed down the hall. "Lila! Lila, where are you?" Lila sighed. "Duty calls." She turned to go, then stopped and added, "Don't throw away the drawing. I worked hard on it." He didn't answer. But when she left, he didn't toss it in the trash either. He slid it into the top drawer of his desk, beneath a revolver and a stack of contracts. It looked absurd there, but somehow it belonged. That night, when his lieutenants gathered for their usual meeting in the cigar room, Vincenzo was distracted. The others noticed. His focus seemed divided, his temper muted. "Everything all right, boss?" one asked cautiously. Vincenzo nodded. "Fine." "You sure? You seem different." He looked at them, his expression hardening back into its familiar shape. "Different how?" "Nicer," another said, half joking. The table went still. Vincenzo's eyes flicked toward the speaker, who immediately regretted it. "Nicer," he repeated, voice like glass. The man stammered. I just meant, less angry." Vincenzo leaned forward. "I don't get angry. I delegate it." They all laughed awkwardly, unsure if he was joking this time. Inside, though, he wasn't thinking about them at all. He was thinking about the way a little girl had looked at him like he wasn't a monster. Like he was human. It was dangerous, that feeling. Dangerous and addictive. That night, when he returned to the kitchen for his usual glass of water, he found something on the counter. Another note, written in childlike scrawl. "You didn't smile today. You're slacking. Lila." He smirked despite himself and left the note where it was. For the first time in a decade, the boss of the Moretti family went to bed with a smile. The following week, Vincenzo Moretti's house buzzed like a beehive pretending to be a museum. Everything polished, everything quiet, but beneath the surface, the workers moved in choreographed panic. There was a meeting scheduled that night. Important men, dangerous men. The kind who wore gold watches like armor and smiled only when they lied. Rosa had been ordered to prepare extra food for the gathering. Real food, not the performative meals they usually left untouched while sipping whiskey and discussing murder like stock prices. But Rosa wasn't alone in the kitchen. Lila sat on the floor again, cross-legged, building a tower out of stacked apples and oranges. "Mama," she said without looking up, "why do we always make too much food if nobody eats it?" "Because they like to pretend," Rosa answered absently, chopping garlic. "Pretend what?" "That they're normal." "Are they?" Rosa stopped. Her knife hovered mid-air. "Eat your snack, Lila." By 7 o'clock, the guests arrived. Vincenzo greeted them in his tailored suit, each handshake measured, his face composed into that familiar mask of calm. The men gathered around the table. Dark suits, heavy rings, fake laughter. They discussed the Tremonti shipment, the expansion into the docks, and the senator's campaign donation that was less donation and more debt repayment. Everything was proceeding as expected, until Lila's voice cut through the conversation like a small bell in a cathedral of devils. "You talk too much for people who don't say anything." Every man at the table froze. Vincenzo turned slowly, jaw tightening. There she was at the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit, unbothered by the dozen pairs of stunned eyes staring at her. Rosa appeared seconds later, breathless and horrified. "Lila. Dio mio. I told you." But Lila went on. "You're all so serious. You should smile more. Or maybe eat something. That helps." One of the men, a thick-necked enforcer named Rico, barked a laugh. "The boss's new consultant, huh?" Another smirked. "Looks like the little lady's braver than most of us." Vincenzo's expression didn't change, but his voice could have sliced through glass. "Oh." The laughter died instantly. Rosa grabbed her daughter and backed away, whispering frantic apologies. The door closed. Vincenzo exhaled slowly, eyes still fixed where the child had been. "Cute kid," Rico muttered under his breath, trying to lighten the mood. "Touch that child, and I'll feed you to your own car," Vincenzo said evenly. Silence. The meeting resumed, but something in the air had shifted. The men spoke softer now, cautious, as if afraid the little girl might still be listening from the walls. After the guests left and the house quieted again, Rosa brought Lila to apologize. "I'm sorry, Signore Moretti," she said. "She doesn't understand." "She understands more than most," he interrupted. Rosa hesitated. "I'll make sure it doesn't happen again." "No," he said, surprising even himself. "Don't silence her. She's just misplaced." Misplaced. People like her, people who see too much, they never fit where they're born. Rosa frowned, unsure how to respond. "She's a child, sir." "Yes," Vincenzo said softly. "And yet she sees the truth clearer than the rest of us." He crouched to meet Lila's eyes. "Next time, don't interrupt meetings like that." "Because they're dangerous?" she asked. "Because they're boring," he said. Lila smiled. "You smiled again." He sighed, pretending to look irritated. "Don't get used to it." Later that night, alone in his study, Vincenzo stared at the folded drawing still tucked under the lamp. The crayon colors looked ridiculous next to stacks of black and white ledgers. He thought of Lila's question about normalcy and, for a fleeting second, wondered if his entire empire was just an expensive way to avoid hunger, physical or otherwise. He poured himself a drink and leaned back, letting the thought linger like the taste of whiskey. Warm, bitter, familiar. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. "Your maid's loyalty will cost you. You've forgotten how hunger feels." He stared at the words for a long moment before locking the phone. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. The next day, he doubled the security detail without explanation. He told himself it was routine, but deep down he knew the warning wasn't random. Rosa had worked for him for 3 years. Long enough to learn things she shouldn't. Still, he didn't suspect her of betrayal. If anything, he suspected that someone else knew she mattered to him now, and that made her a target. That evening, while Vincenzo discussed logistics with his driver in the garage, Lila appeared again, barefoot, holding 2 sandwiches. "I made extra," she said. "You didn't eat lunch." He looked at her like she'd just offered him a relic from another life. "You made this." "Well, Mama helped with the knife part. But I did the mayonnaise." He took the sandwich, inspected it, and bit in. It was terrible. Too much mayo, barely any filling. But he ate it anyway. Lila grinned proudly. "See? You can eat." He smirked. "You're turning into a terrible influence." "That means good, right?" "Sometimes." She climbed onto an overturned bucket and swung her legs, studying him as he finished the sandwich. "You look tired," she said. "I am tired." "Then sleep." "People like me don't sleep." "Because you're afraid." He glanced at her. "You ask too many questions. Maybe you don't get enough answers." He paused. "You ever think you talk too much?" "Only when people don't listen." That earned her another faint smile, one he didn't bother to hide this time. Rosa appeared moments later, rushing toward them. "Lila, I told you to stay upstairs." "I was feeding him," Lila said innocently. "He was starving." Vincenzo rose, brushing crumbs from his hands. "It's fine, Rosa." "Sir, she shouldn't bother." "She's not bothering. She's making me reconsider my menu." Rosa blinked. "Your what?" "My life choices," he said dryly. Lila giggled. "See, Mama. He is funny." Vincenzo raised a brow. "Don't spread rumors." The air softened. For a rare moment, the mansion didn't feel like a fortress. It felt like a home. But then, far off in the night, a car engine growled near the gates, loud enough to make the guards shift uneasily. Vincenzo's face hardened again. He turned toward the sound, eyes narrowing. "Go inside," he said quietly. Rosa obeyed immediately, pulling Lila close. And as the headlights swept across the driveway, cutting through the dark like a blade, Vincenzo felt it. The first real tremor of danger creeping back into his controlled world. Rain began sometime after midnight. Soft at first, then relentless, the kind that turned the world gray and blurred the lines between sky and ground. The Moretti estate looked almost peaceful under it, but Vincenzo knew peace was always camouflage. He hadn't slept. He stood by the upstairs window, the curtains half drawn, staring out at the shimmering driveway where headlights had flared hours earlier. Whoever had approached the gate hadn't stopped and hadn't been caught. But something about the timing, precisely when he'd been in the garage with Lila, felt wrong. Downstairs, the house creaked as Rosa moved pots and pans, her quiet hum. Normal sounds, the kind that usually disappeared under the noise of his life. He liked them now. That annoyed him. He adjusted his cufflinks and headed down. The smell of coffee and toasted bread met him halfway. Rosa looked up from the counter, startled. "Signore Moretti. You're awake early." "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Too much rain." "Rain makes most people sleep better." "I'm not most people." She smiled faintly, then turned to pour him coffee. "I'm making breakfast for Lila before school. Would you like?" He raised a hand. "No need." But before she could reply, Lila burst into the kitchen wearing mismatched socks and the kind of energy that ignored adult tension. "Good morning, boss," she said cheerfully, as though greeting a family friend, not a man responsible for half the city's criminal economy. He eyed her socks. "You're dressed for war." She grinned. "The socks don't match on purpose. It's good luck." "For whom?" "For me. And maybe you." He took his coffee and Saturday we'll see. Lila munched cereal while Rosa packed her lunch. The rain tapped the windows like restless fingers. Vincenzo watched the scene in silence, pretending to read a document, but now and then his eyes flicked toward them. Mother and daughter moving in rhythm, as if the world outside didn't exist. Then the phone on the wall rang. Rosa jumped at the sound. Vincenzo answered before the second ring. "Moretti." A pause. Then a voice, rough and accented. "We saw your maid leaving the grocery store last night. Pretty woman. Shame if something happened to her." The line went dead. Vincenzo set the receiver down slowly, jaw tightening. "Who was it?" Rosa asked. "Wrong number," he lied. She frowned, unconvinced, but didn't push. Lila looked up from her cereal. "Mama, why's his face doing that thing again?" "What thing?" "The thing where he looks like he's thinking about something bad." Rosa opened her mouth to scold her, but Vincenzo spoke first. "Because sometimes he is." The girl studied him, serious now. "You should think about something good then." "I try," he said softly. "But bad things usually show up first. Then you need better locks." He couldn't help it. He laughed. A real unguarded laugh that made Rosa stare like she'd seen a miracle. But the sound died quickly. By noon, the rain had stopped. Rosa walked Lila to the waiting car that would take her to school. One of the estate's drivers, always the same man, trustworthy. Vincenzo watched from his study window, fingers drumming against the desk. When the car pulled out of the gates, He finally turned to the letter that had arrived with his morning mail. No return address. Just a white envelope, clean and unassuming. Inside, a single photograph. Rosa and Lila were in the market yesterday, unaware they were being followed. No message this time. None needed. He placed the photo flat on the desk, smoothed its edges, then pressed his palm against it until his knuckles whitened. He'd protected his empire with fear, money, and meticulous rules. But fear didn't scare everyone, and rules didn't protect the innocent. When he finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. You made it personal. That evening, he summoned two of his oldest men, Dario and Luca. Someone's watching the Maid, Vincenzo said, sliding the photo across the table. Find out who. No noise, no mess. Luca frowned. Could be Tremonti's people again. They've been circling since the docks deal. Or they're trying to pull you out into the open, Dario added. Use her as bait. I'm aware, Vincenzo said. That's why we move quietly. What about the girl? His gaze flicked toward the window, where the rain had begun again. She doesn't know anything. She stays safe. No discussions. Dario nodded, but his eyes betrayed confusion. In the old days, Vincenzo wouldn't have cared about a maid, let alone her child. Something was shifting, and they both saw it. Later that night, as the guards changed shifts, Vincenzo walked the perimeter himself, something he hadn't done in years. The rain soaked his suit, but he didn't care. He needed to feel the weight of the air, the closeness of danger. He passed the garden path where Lila sometimes played with the stray cat that lived under the hydrangeas. The small swing she'd insisted Rosa hang from the tree creaked in the wind. It was ridiculous. A Mafia fortress with a child swing. And yet, it felt like the only honest thing on the property. He stopped beneath it, rain dripping from his hair, and whispered to no one, I should have sent them away. A voice startled him. Sent who away? He turned. Lila stood at the edge of the veranda, wrapped in a blanket, her hair damp from curiosity more than weather. Inside, he ordered. It's late. You're out here. I'm working. You look like you're just standing. He exhaled sharply through his nose. You're impossible. She smiled. Mama says that means I'm interesting. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Do you know what happens to interesting people in my world? They make boring people nervous. For a long second, neither moved. Then, against his own logic, he reached out and tucked the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Go back to bed, Bambina. She nodded and turned to go. At the doorway she looked back and said, If you're scared, you can come inside too. He almost smiled again, but his eyes went back to the tree, the empty swing, and the shadows beyond the fence. Somewhere out there someone was watching, and for the first time in years, the thought didn't just make him angry. It made him afraid. The next morning dawned clear and deceptively bright, the kind of light that makes people forget the night ever held threats. But Vincenzo didn't forget. He hadn't slept. He'd sat in his office all night, the photo of Rosa and Lila still on his desk. When he finally rose, the decision had already formed like a bruise, dark, inevitable, and painful to touch. He would end this. Downstairs, Rosa was setting the breakfast table, humming softly to Lila, who sat swinging her legs on the chair. The girl had drawn something again. 2 stick figures, one tall, one small, standing beside what looked like a castle. Rosa noticed him first. Signore Moretti, she said quickly, wiping her hands. You didn't sleep again, did you? Sleep is for people without enemies. Then you must be exhausted for life. He ignored that, though the corner of his mouth twitched. His eyes drifted to the paper in Lila's hands. What are you drawing? Lila grinned. You and me. He blinked. That's optimistic. You're teaching me how to be serious, she explained, as if that were a game. Rosa shook her head. Lila, the signore doesn't have time for. It's fine, Vincenzo interrupted. Everyone should learn how to be serious. Even me. He turned back to Rosa. I need you both to stay inside the house today. No errands. No deliveries. She froze, sensing the shift beneath his tone. Has something happened? No. Something might. Should I be afraid? He paused. Not yet. By mid-morning, the estate hummed with quiet tension. Guards moved in pairs, scanning the perimeter twice as often. Lila, oblivious, had turned the living room into her own kingdom of crayons and stuffed animals. Vincenzo stood near the grand piano, pretending to read a newspaper while his mind worked through logistics. Routes, rival movements, weak links. The photograph from yesterday remained folded in his pocket, a reminder of vulnerability he hated to acknowledge. Rosa approached him cautiously. Signore, if we're in danger, I should take Lila somewhere safe. There's nowhere safer than here, he said flatly. I built this house to keep danger out. She met his gaze. You also built it to keep people out. He said nothing. Her voice softened. Sometimes those are the same thing. He didn't like the truth of that. Go stay with your daughter, he said. Outside, a black sedan rolled to a stop at the gates. The guard leaned down to check the driver's ID. A routine moment, until the guard frowned. There was no ID. The driver smiled. Tell Moretti the past says hello. The explosion that followed shattered the calm like glass. Inside, the house shook. The sound was thunder, metal, and chaos. Lila screamed. Rosa grabbed her and dropped behind the counter as glass rained from the windows. Vincenzo was already moving. He ran through the corridor, past the toppled vase, the echo of gunfire snapping outside. He threw open the kitchen door. Down, he barked. Rosa covered Lila's head with her arms. Stay there, he ordered, drawing his gun. Do not move. Lila's eyes were huge. Boss, what's happening? Someone made a mistake, he said grimly, then slipped out the side door. The courtyard was chaos. Smoke, shouts, and men firing from behind columns. The gate lay half destroyed, the sedan burning in the center like a warning. Vincenzo moved fast, precisely. He ducked behind a pillar, returned fire, and clipped one of the attackers in the shoulder. The man fell, screaming. Luca! Vincenzo shouted. Status. 2 down, boss. Others fleeing toward the road. Let them go. What? Let them run. We'll find them later. He turned back toward the house, pulse hammering. Inside, Rosa, Lila. He didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. When he stepped into the kitchen again, the air was thick with the smell of smoke and coffee. Rosa was still crouched behind the counter, holding Lila tightly. Both were safe. He holstered the gun. It's over. For now. Rosa asked quietly. For now. Lila peered up at him, trembling. Did you shoot the bad guys? Some of them. Are they gone? Yes. She studied him. You look sad. I'm angry, he corrected. She shook her head. No. Sad. He stared at her, speechless. For a child who barely reached his waist, she saw too much. That evening, the smell of gunpowder lingered in the air. The men cleaned the yard, disposed of wreckage, and replaced glass. The house regained its silence, but not its peace. Rosa found Vincenzo sitting alone in his study, staring at an untouched plate of dinner. You saved us, she said softly. He didn't look up. You shouldn't have needed saving. You can't control everything. I used to, he said bitterly. She stepped closer. Lila says you're her favorite person. He snorted. She needs better taste. No, Rosa said gently. She just sees the part you don't show anyone. He finally looked at her. And what's that? The part that still remembers being hungry. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Thick, heavy, almost intimate. Then a knock at the door shattered it. Luca stepped in, his face pale. Boss, we found something. He handed over a small metal box. Inside lay a fragment of the bomb casing, engraved with a mark, a serpent coiled around a dagger. Rosa frowned. What is it? Vincenzo's expression darkened. A signature. Whose? The Tremonti family. He closed the box slowly. Then this isn't over, he said. Rosa's eyes widened. What will you do? Vincenzo looked toward the hallway where Lila slept, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. What I should have done years ago, he said quietly. End it. But even as he said it, he couldn't shake the feeling that the war outside had already found its way in, and that this time no amount of power would keep innocence untouched. The next morning, the estate smelled of disinfectant and gun oil. The broken glass had been swept away, the scorch marks scrubbed from the marble, but the air still carried the memory of fire. Vincenzo stood at the dining table, sleeves rolled up, maps and photographs spread before him. The Tremonti family. Their operations. Their routes. Their weaknesses. He circled one name with a black marker. Silvio Tremonti. Younger brother to the late Don, now running what passed for their business. Reckless, vain, and desperate for reputation. The kind of man who mistook chaos for power. Across the table, Luca leaned on his elbows. You want him alive? Vincenzo's voice was low. I want him to understand. Dario smirked. You're going soft, boss. He looked up. If I were soft, you'd already be dead for saying that. The smirk vanished. Get the car ready, Vincenzo said. We visit Silvio tonight. Rosa found him later, sitting in the courtyard beneath the olive trees, tie loosened, staring into a cup of untouched espresso. You're leaving, she said. I have work. Work that bleeds. Everything worth doing bleeds, he replied. She came closer, folding her arms. Lila keeps asking if you'll eat dinner with us again. I told her you're busy keeping bad people away. That's true enough. She said maybe the bad people just need someone to tell them to stop. He almost smiled. And if they don't listen? She says then you take their dinner too. That earned a quiet laugh, short and genuine. Smart girl. Rosa hesitated. Promise me you'll come back. He looked at her for a long time. I don't make promises I can't keep. Then don't make me regret believing in you. He stood, his chair scraping softly against the stone. If I fail, you'll know. The silence will tell you before the phone does. Night fell like a drawn curtain. 3 cars moved through the narrow industrial streets of South Naples. Black, silent, engines low. The Tremonti warehouse loomed ahead, lit by flickering lamps, the kind of place where screams echoed unnoticed. Vincenzo stepped out first. The air smelled of oil, rust, and rain-soaked concrete. His men fanned out, weapons ready. He entered through the side door, boots silent on the wet floor. Inside, voices drifted from the office upstairs. Laughter, clinking glasses. He walked up the metal stairs like a ghost. At the top, 2 guards looked up, too slow. 2 muffled shots and they were gone. Vincenzo pushed open the office door. Silvio Tremonti sat behind a cluttered desk, a half-empty bottle of whiskey in front of him. He looked up pale. Moretti. Didn't expect a house call. I like to keep old traditions, Vincenzo said, stepping forward. You send me a car bomb, I send you a visit. Silvio chuckled weakly. You think that was me? Please. You give me too much credit. I may be ambitious, but I'm not suicidal. Then enlighten me. Silvio leaned back. We've had our disagreements, sure. But that job wasn't ours. Someone's stirring the pot. Making it look like us so you'll take the bait. Vincenzo's eyes narrowed. You're saying someone else wants war. Someone always wants war, Silvio said, pouring himself another drink. But I like living too much to start one with you. He sipped, watching Vincenzo carefully. You've got leaks, my friend. Maybe closer than you think. Vincenzo said nothing. The silence between them stretched until Silvio shifted nervously in his chair. Finally, Vincenzo turned to leave. If I find out you're lying, I'll finish what your brother started. Silvio smiled faintly. If I were lying, I'd already be dead. The ride back was quiet. Rain streaked the windows again, blurring the streetlights into ribbons of orange and white. Dario finally spoke. You believe him? No, Vincenzo said. But I believe in coincidences less. Luca frowned. Then who else would? Someone who knew when I'd be in the garage. Someone who knew Rosa and her daughter was in the house. He looked out the window, his reflection fractured by raindrops. There's a traitor in my own walls. When they returned, the estate was still. Guards at their posts. The faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. The kind of silence that always came after too much noise. Rosa was sitting at the counter, waiting. "You're back." He nodded. "Did you find who did it?" "Not yet." She studied his face. "You look different." "Do I?" "Yes. Like you've realized something terrible." He didn't answer. Then, from the doorway, Lila's small voice. "Mama says if you stare at walls too long, you start seeing ghosts." He turned. "Maybe I already do." She tilted her head. "You're not scary when you talk like that." He crouched to her level. "Then how do I look?" "Sad. But like you don't want anyone to know." That silenced him. Rosa exhaled softly. "Go to bed, tesoro." Lila nodded, kissed her mother's cheek, then, without hesitation, walked over and placed a tiny hand on Vincenzo's knee. "Don't let the ghosts win." He looked down at that small hand, delicate and unafraid. "I'll try," he said quietly. After she went upstairs, Rosa lingered by the counter. "You said someone knew too much. What does that mean?" "It means someone close to me is selling information." "To whom?" "I don't know yet. But I'll find out." She hesitated. "And what happens to them when you do?" He met her eyes. "You don't want to know." That night, long after everyone slept, Vincenzo sat alone in his study again. The rain had stopped, but the windows still trembled faintly in the wind. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thin file marked with a single name, Rosa DeLuca. Employment records. Background checks. Old addresses. Nothing unusual. Except for one detail that stopped him cold. Her previous employer. Carlo Tremonti. The name hit like a bullet without sound. He stared at it for a long time, heart slowing, thoughts spiraling into dangerous clarity. Was Rosa part of this? A plant? A spy? Or something worse? An innocent thread tied to a history that now circled back to him? He didn't know. The next morning began with sunlight too bright for comfort. It poured through the kitchen windows, lighting the steam from a pot of boiling water like a thin veil of smoke. Rosa stood stirring oatmeal, humming under her breath. Across the room, Vincenzo sat at the breakfast table, silent, unreadable. His cup of espresso had gone cold. He had barely slept. The file still burned in his mind. Carlo Tremonti. Her former employer. A connection too close to ignore. Now he watched her move, the calm precision, the grace that came from years of servitude, and wondered if every motion was practiced, rehearsed, and designed. "Would you like more coffee?" she asked without looking at him. He nodded, voice steady. "Please." She poured. The scent rose. Dark, rich, familiar. He'd always found her coffee better than anyone else's in the house. "Did Lila wake up?" he asked. "Still asleep," Rosa said. "She's been restless since the explosion." "So have I." She gave a small smile. "You hide it better." He met her eyes briefly. Calm, dark, and watchful. "You think so?" "I know so." A quiet moment passed. The spoon clinked against the cup. He leaned back. "You worked for Carlo Tremonti once." Her hand froze mid-motion. "I checked your file," he continued evenly. "You didn't mention it." Rosa's voice was low. "It wasn't relevant." "It's relevant now." She took a slow breath, then set the spoon down. "I was a cleaner in one of his hotels. For 6 months. That was almost 10 years ago." "Why did you leave?" "Because I found out what kind of man he was." Vincenzo's gaze didn't soften. "And what kind was that?" "The kind who thinks people are property." He studied her for a long time. The truth in her voice wasn't loud, it was quiet, broken around the edges. It sounded like something that had once been fear. "Did you know his brother?" he asked finally. She frowned. "Silvio." No. I barely saw the boss himself. I just cleaned what others wanted hidden. Hidden, he repeated softly. Yes. Their eyes locked. He could feel the lie if it was there. He'd built a life reading faces, watching the twitch of a jaw, the tremor of a pupil. But Rose's face remained calm, not cold, just tired. He leaned forward slightly. Then why didn't you tell me? Because people like me don't get to explain our pasts, she said. We just survive them. The door creaked. Lila entered, hair a messy halo, rubbing her eyes. You're talking too loud, she murmured. We weren't, Rosa said quickly. Yes, you were, Lila insisted. Mama, you only breathe that hard when you're mad. And you, she pointed at Vincenzo, only stare like that when you don't trust someone. The adults exchanged a startled glance. Vincenzo tried to smile. You've been keeping notes, have you? I'm good at watching people, Lila said proudly. It's like reading books but they move. He chuckled despite himself. Then what do you read about me? She tilted her head, considering. You're a good man who thinks he's not. Silence followed. Rose's lips parted slightly. Not a smile, not quite surprise, but something gentler. Vincenzo cleared his throat. That's a dangerous opinion to have around here. Then I'll whisper it, Lila said matter-of-factly. He looked at her for a long moment, then turned to Rosa. I'll be in the study. We'll talk later. She nodded slowly, eyes following him until he left the room. The study was dim, the only light coming from the narrow slit of the sun breaking through the blinds. Vincenzo closed the door behind him and leaned against it. He'd gone into the kitchen ready to interrogate her, ready to break her down with logic and suspicion. But what he'd found instead was something he couldn't weaponize. Sincerity. And the child's words, "You're a good man who thinks he's not," refused to leave him alone. He sat down at the desk, staring at the photograph of his own mother he kept hidden in the bottom drawer. She had the same eyes as Rosa, patient, watchful, and burdened. He pressed a hand to his face. "I'm losing my edge," he muttered. "Or maybe you're finding it again," came a voice from the door. He looked up. Rosa stood there, quiet, tentative. "I didn't want to disturb you," she said softly. "But I need to tell you something." He gestured for her to enter. She walked forward, her posture steady but her hands trembling just slightly. "When I worked for Carlo Tremonti, I saw things. Deals, people who came and never left. I kept my mouth shut because I needed the job. But I left when I realized he was planning something bigger. Something that involved you." Vincenzo's attention sharpened. "Involved me how?" "I don't know. Just. I overheard your name once. He said the Morettus wouldn't stay powerful forever. That he had a way to make sure your house fell from the inside." Vincenzo frowned. "And you think that's what's happening now?" She nodded. Someone might still be following his plan. He stood, pacing slowly. "If you knew that, why stay here?" "Because running doesn't stop danger," she said quietly. "It only brings it closer." He stopped, looking at her. There was courage in her voice, the kind that didn't roar but stayed standing even when afraid. He realized in that instant that whatever Rose's connection to his enemies had been, she wasn't their weapon. She was just another survivor trying to protect what little peace she'd found. And maybe that made her the only person in his house he could actually trust. That evening, as the sun set, he found Lila drawing again in the living room. This time she'd drawn him, Rosa, and herself, not beside a castle, but sitting at a table with plates of food. He pointed to the drawing. "Is that me smiling?" "Yes," she said proudly. "I don't do that often." "You should. It makes you look like you forgot to be mean." He laughed softly. "Maybe I did." She grinned. "Then don't remember again." Upstairs, Rosa watched them from the doorway. Her daughter laughing, the boss she feared learning to. For the first time since the explosion, the house felt alive again. But she also knew this piece was only a pause before something bigger. Because if what she'd told Vincenzo was true, if someone inside the estate was following an old Tremonti plan, then the real danger hadn't passed. It was still coming. And when it arrived, none of them would remain the same. It was near midnight when the first wrong sound reached him. Not loud, just wrong. A door closing too softly down the west hall, the servants' wing. Everyone should have been asleep. Vincenzo froze, halfway through pouring a drink. He listened. 1 heartbeat. 2. Then another soft sound, a whisper of movement, careful, measured, and deliberate. He set the glass down, silent as breath, and moved toward the corridor. The house was dark except for the thin gold lights spilling under doorways. Rain ticked against the windows again. Always the rain, as if the city never dried of its sins. He passed the staircase, the ticking of the grandfather clock the only sound until, there, a faint metallic click. He drew his gun, stepped forward, and turned the corner. And stopped. Luca stood by the utility cabinet, flashlight in one hand, a small radio transmitter in the other. Vincenzo's voice came low, like gravel. "Tell me you're not that stupid." Luca froze. Then slowly, his hand lifted, not toward the gun but toward the transmitter. "I can explain." "I'm listening." "It wasn't supposed to be like this," Luca said quickly. "They offered me protection, that's all. They said the Tremontis were coming for everyone close to you, that if I didn't give them information." "You gave them my schedules. My routes." Luca's eyes darted toward the shadows, guilt twisting his face. "I didn't know they'd go after the house boss. I swear. I thought it was business, just business." Vincenzo stepped closer. "And what part of business involves threatening a child?" Luca swallowed hard, words collapsing. "You put them in danger," Vincenzo said quietly. "My men. My home. That girl. Boss, please." Vincenzo's silence was worse than rage. The radio in Luca's hand crackled suddenly. A voice, distorted by static, spilled through. "Confirm location. Package retrieved." Luca's panic was instant. "No, wait." He reached to switch it off. Vincenzo grabbed it first. "This is Moretti," he said into the receiver, voice like steel. "If you want a war, come collect it yourself." He crushed the radio against the wall. Luca's breath came shallow. "They'll come now. They'll come here. Then we'll be ready," Vincenzo said. He turned, motioning down the hall. "Wake the guards. Seal the gates." And Luca. The man hesitated. "If you want to live long enough to fix this, you'll do exactly as I say." Luca nodded once and disappeared into the darkness. In the kitchen, Rosa startled awake at the sound of footsteps. She stepped out to find Vincenzo already moving through the hall, issuing orders in clipped Italian. "What's happening?" she asked. "Trouble." "How bad?" "Bad enough." Lila appeared at the top of the stairs in her nightgown, clutching her rabbit. "Mama." Rosa looked up. "Go back to bed, tesoro." But Vincenzo said, "No, keep her with you. The house might shake again." Rosa's eyes widened. "You mean?" He cut her off gently. "Nothing's going to happen to you. I promise." She almost believed him. Within minutes, the estate transformed. Guards took positions by the windows, communication lines crackled, and the air filled with a low hum of preparation. Vincenzo stood by the main entrance, hands clasped behind his back, outwardly calm. But inside, something was unraveling. He'd built his empire on control, on knowing every move before it happened. And yet here, in his own house, he'd been blind. Behind him, Rosa appeared quietly, Lila's small hand tucked in hers. "You shouldn't be out here," he said without turning. "Neither should you," she replied. He exhaled slowly. "You two are leaving the city tomorrow. What about you?" "I stay." Lila tugged at her mother's sleeve. "He can't stay alone." Rosa looked at him, searching. "You don't have to do everything alone, Vincenzo." "I don't have a choice." "Yes," she said softly. "You always do." A shout outside broke the moment. One of the guards ran in. "Boss." Movement near the east gate. 2 cars approaching fast. Vincenzo's expression hardened. "Positions." He turned to Rosa. Downstairs now. Go to the storage room and stay there until I call you. She didn't argue this time. She just grabbed Lila's hand and ran. The front of the house filled with light. Headlights cutting across the wet gravel, sweeping the facade like searchlights. Engines revved. Doors slammed. Shadows moved through the mist. Vincenzo stood at the top of the staircase, calm as marble as the sound of boots echoed toward him. Then, silence. One of his guards called from outside. "Boss, they're stopping." A voice cut through the static night air. "We're not here to fight, Moretti." Vincenzo frowned. "Who are you?" "An old friend," the voice said. And then, stepping from the darkness, came Silvio Tremonti. Unarmed, drenched, smiling like sin itself. The guards aimed their weapons, but Vincenzo raised a hand. "Stand down." Silvio looked up at him. "I told you we didn't plant that bomb. I came to prove it. You brought 2 cars of armed men to prove your innocence? They're insurance. And what exactly am I insuring you against? Your temper." Vincenzo descended the stairs slowly. "Say what you came to say." Silvio's smile faded. "You've got a mole in your ranks, Moretti. Not just a traitor. A professional. Someone who's been playing both sides for months. Feeding me lies while giving someone else your truths." "I already know about Luca." Silvio shook his head. "Luca's just the delivery boy. The real leak is higher." Vincenzo's voice dropped. "Then who?" Silvio hesitated. "You won't believe me unless you see it yourself." He reached into his coat, slowly, and pulled out a thin file, handing it over. Inside were photographs. Surveillance shots. One of Rosa, meeting someone in a market parking lot 2 weeks earlier. The man beside her, Luca. Another angle. Money changing hands. Another. Rosa looking over her shoulder, expression unreadable. Vincenzo's stomach turned to ice. Silvio stepped back. "You see, it's not me you should worry about." Vincenzo closed the file slowly. His voice came low and deliberate. "If you're lying." "I'm not," Silvio said. "And if you want to survive this, neither are you." The guards escorted the Tremonti men out, tension thick enough to choke on. When the gates finally closed again, Vincenzo stood alone in the foyer, the file still in his hand. Thunder rolled outside. He didn't move for a long time. Then he turned and walked slowly toward the lower hall, toward the storage room where Rosa waited with her daughter. Every step felt heavier than the last. Because if what he'd just seen was true, then the only person he'd started to trust might have been the one undoing him all along. Great. Here's the final chapter, written from Lila's point of view, staying within the emotional cinematic tone we built together. No graphic content. Just quiet suspense, truth, and forgiveness before dawn. Lila pressed her ear to the wooden door. The house above was breathing differently tonight. Heavier, slower, as if afraid to wake itself. She could hear the rain outside and the tick of the clock that Mama said never stopped, not even when the whole world did. "Mama," she whispered. "Why are we hiding again?" Rosa looked down at her, eyes shiny in the low light. "We're not hiding, Tesoro. We're waiting." But her voice trembled. The bulb in the ceiling flickered once, like it too wanted to leave. Rosa kept glancing toward the door, the one that led back into the hall where the boss had gone. Lila didn't like the look on her mother's face. It was the same one she wore when she saw a letter from a landlord. Part anger, part fear, part decision. Footsteps. Slow ones. Then, a shadow moved under the door. The handle turned. Rosa's breath caught, but she didn't move. When the door opened, Vincenzo Moretti filled the frame. Tall, calm, and soaked through with the kind of silence that could break glass. One hand held a thin file. The other hung loose at his side. His eyes, usually made of stone, looked heavier tonight. Lila took a small step back, gripping her stuffed rabbit. "Go upstairs, Bambina," he said gently. Rosa stepped forward. "She stays." Vincenzo's gaze met hers. For a long moment, neither moved. Then he closed the door behind him. Lila sat on the cold floor, small enough to pretend the world couldn't see her. From there she watched them. Two adults who looked like they'd both lost something they hadn't realized they loved until now. Vincenzo placed the file on the table between them. The sound was soft but final. "Where were you 2 weeks ago?" he asked quietly. "When you told me you were visiting your sister in Trenton?" Rosa didn't answer. Her hands trembled just once before she crossed her arms tightly, as if holding herself together. "You already know. I want to hear you say it." She looked up. "They came for me. The Tremontis. They knew about Lila. They said if I didn't meet them, if I didn't tell them when you left the house, they'd—" She stopped herself and turned toward the child. Vincenzo's expression softened, but only slightly. "You could have told me." Rosa shook her head. "I couldn't risk it. I didn't trust anyone here. You think I don't see what happens when people disappoint you?" The words hit like quiet bullets. For a long time, he said nothing. The clock upstairs ticked louder, rain whispering against the window. Finally, he said, "You put me in their sights." "I put myself there," she said. "Not you. They wanted to use me, but I gave them nothing that mattered. You're alive, aren't you?" That stopped him. Lila didn't understand everything, but she understood enough. Her mama was crying, and the boss wasn't angry, just tired in a way she'd never seen. Rosa stepped closer, voice breaking. "I didn't betray you for money. I did it because they said they'd hurt her." "What would you have done, Vincenzo?" He didn't answer right away. He stared at her, really stared, and for the first time Lila saw fear in his eyes. Not of her mother. Of the truth. "I would have done the same," he said finally. The tension in the room shifted. Less sharp, more human. Vincenzo looked toward Lila, who stood now, unsure whether to run or stay. "Come here, Bambina." She hesitated, then walked over. Her hand was small against his. "Do you understand what happened?" he asked gently. She nodded. "Mama was scared. You were scared. But you both tried to be brave." That earned a faint smile, the kind that barely lived long enough to count as one. "She shouldn't have had to be brave," he murmured. "Neither should you." Rosa wiped her eyes. "So, what happens now?" He thought about it for a long time. Then he looked at Lila again. "Now you both stay here tonight. In the morning, my driver will take you somewhere safe." Rosa's voice shook. "And after that?" "After that," Vincenzo said, "I'll clean up what's left of this mess." Quietly. Her shoulders dropped. Half relief, half sadness. "You're letting us go." "I'm letting you live," he said softly. "That's more than most get from me." Lila watched her mother's face change. Fear melting into gratitude, then guilt, then something like peace. "Thank you," Rosa whispered. Vincenzo turned toward the door. But before he could leave, Lila's small voice stopped him. "Boss." He paused. "Yes, Lila." She clutched her rabbit tighter. "You didn't eat dinner again." For a heartbeat, the air cracked, then softened into laughter. Rosa's quiet but real. Vincenzo exhaled through a smile that surprised even him. "Then maybe," he said, "you should set the table." They ended up in the kitchen, the same place it had all started. Cold spaghetti, warm light, and 3 plates. The storm kept whispering outside, but inside the walls it felt different. Like the house itself was finally breathing again. Lila watched them both across the table, the boss and her mama. 2 tired grown-ups who finally looked human. And when she took her first bite, she looked up and said the line that made them both laugh quietly through their exhaustion. "See, leftovers always taste better when nobody's scared anymore."
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazy and intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.